Hello and welcome to Unibet's Inside the Octagon. I'm John Gooden, along with Dan the Outlaw Hardy, and we're here to preview the much-anticipated return of one of the greatest UFC fighters of all time, Anderson Silva, against the highly skilled and colourful Nick Diaz.
On January 31st, a fighter with no fear.
Public enemy number one, it's Nick Diaz.
Meets a legend with no limits.
The greatest fighter on the planet Earth, Anderson Silva.
When that door shuts, all hell is gonna break loose.
Oh! Unbelievable! The Spider is back! Oh! Nick Diaz! Wow. Without a doubt. That's a scary man. Anderson Silva. Nick Diaz. This is the fight. I can't wait for this fight.
We're both so excited for the return of the Spider, as I'm sure you are too. And Dan, UFC 183, it isn't just about that main event. It has some key matchups in numerous divisions, which will really get that Vegas crowd warmed up.
Yeah, really excited to see Thiago Alves on the card. He's taking on Jordan Main. That's a great fight. I'm excited to see Joe Lozon on the card, obviously a personal favourite of mine, and he's taking on Ally Clint, who's coming off a good win over Ross Pearson, and Kelvin Gastelum against Tyron Woodley. That's a big fight for the welterweight division. Kelvin Gastelum's really making some noise at the moment, but Tyron Woodley's a tough test for anybody to get through. Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's get to it. The future Hall of Famer, Anderson Silva, already achieved legendary status, such a creative martial artist, but in his own words, no one is invincible. And we saw that against Chris Weidman. His family, we've learned since, said, we don't want you to go back into it. But Anderson Silva has martial arts running through his veins, and we're delighted that we're going to see him once again in the Octagon. Yeah, kind of selfishly, I can't wait to see Anderson Silva fight. And taking on another one of my favourites in Nick Diaz as well. You know, this is one of those fights that comes around, you know, once every 5 or 10 years, and I am so excited for it. Just to do the breakdown, it's kind of an honour for me. Anderson Silva, so let's have a talk about him. His opportunity making for strikes is something that nobody else in the UFC can do. It's fascinating to watch how he plays with his opponent. He'll draw the fight out of them. He'll create mistakes by them so he can capitalise on it and land the strikes that he wants. And then scrambles like this, where in a flurry he'll see an opportunity in a split second. You just don't see this very often. Jose Aldo is the only other person I can think of against Chad Mendes that times his knees like that. And again here, look, a very short range head kick, perfectly placed, perfectly timed. He creates these opportunities for himself that most people wouldn't even see. Again, this, a beautiful strike, I had to pick it out. As Chael Sonnen's stepping forward, he catches the front leg and lands an elbow over the top. His ability to use techniques that nobody else can get away with, and his ability to generate immense power in a very short range where he can almost put his hand on his opponent and just place a fist on them. It's scary. It's something that we don't see very often. And against a guy like Nick Diaz, who's going to be standing right in front of him, it could be easy pickings for him.
Everything's almost laser-guided with Anderson Silva, and so significant and so effective. And it all just seems so effortless. It's like he's got a sixth sense for mixed martial arts.
Well, this is another thing I want to talk about. He likes to play in the fights. And we've seen him in fights, we've seen him get bored in fights, which we only see it against, you know, from the really elite of elite. As you can see against Yushin Okami, who, you know, is a very tough middleweight. Anderson Silva just playing, like changing the cadence of his fighting style, changing his rhythm. First he's fast, then he slows it right down, drops his hands, slips a couple of punches to try and draw his opponent in. Did the same against Forrest Griffin with a beautiful finish that was. And a jab puts Yushin Okami on the floor. And Yushin Okami is one of the biggest middleweights around as well. He's a huge guy. Now, this is something I want to talk about. I'm just going to pause this for a second. One thing that's a key to Anderson Silva's head movement is his placement of his head over his front foot. This allows him to push back off his front foot quickly and move his head. So, but what it also does is it makes his opponent think that he's closer than he is. So when they throw their strikes, they always fall short. Again, look here, making Vitor Belfort feel very comfortable in this position, and Vitor Belfort is mirroring his position, look. He's doing the same thing now. And then Anderson Silva takes this opportunity, front kick right under the chin. Perfectly placed, perfectly timed. Vitor Belfort picked his front leg up because he thought Anderson Silva was going to throw a low kick, and straight to the chin.
And ended up on one of the biggest highlight reel knockouts of all time. Anderson Silva doesn't make many mistakes, Dan.
No.
And it can cause, I guess, with people every now and then, just a bit of overconfidence. And you can't blame him for it.
Yeah, well, no, I think I'd be pretty confident if I was Anderson Silva as well. We saw this in the Chris Weidman fight, and we've seen him before. You know, he'll turn himself off the fence, and then he'll beckon his opponent back to him. Now, this is what I want to talk about. The thing that Chris Weidman did differently was that he travelled forward with his punches, much to the guidance of his cornerman Ray Longo, I think. Again, look, this is Anderson Silva that we've not seen before going into this fight. Talking, trying to, you know, playing around. Let's just listen to this Ray Longo quote.
I want you to punch a hole in this chest. That's what I want. Everything else is good. Don't get careless. You're looking good.
Punch a hole in his chest. Now, if there's anybody in the
Correction, but I won't make you say it again.
You see, this is what I was talking about with Chris Weidman travelling forward on his punching combination, something that Nick Diaz does very well. Anderson Silva's faking, slips 2 punches, but he's reaching, his weight's over his back foot now. He's got nowhere else to go.
Yeah.
And because Chris Weidman follows forward with another right hand that wasn't expected, clips him right at the end of his range. So what I'm saying is that what with Nick Diaz having such long punches, which we're going to look at in a second, as long as he's moving forward, Anderson Silva can't use that same kind of head movement that he does to draw people in. He's going to have to be a lot more cautious. OK, well, to help me with some questions for you, Dan, we called on Twitter, and thank you for that. So I've got a couple in the bag here for you. Now, from Psychedelic Socrates, let's just celebrate that Twitter handle for one moment. Well done.
Do you think Anderson is going to be able to keep pace after such involved recovery? Diaz will bring that marathon pace. Diaz likes a triathlon just to keep fit, so he really does have pace for days.
He does, and this is a factor in the fight, I think, particularly given the fact that it's going to be spread over 5 rounds. Obviously, Anderson Silva's comfortable with 5 rounds. Nick Diaz, as we know, is a cardio machine. I think Joe Rogan mentioned he'd swam back from Alcatraz twice. I'm not sure why you go there a second time if you had to swim back, but that's just me. I think it's an interesting fight because Nick Diaz is the guy that can push Anderson Silva. He can make him work. My question is, does Nick Diaz want to push Anderson Silva? Does he want to keep walking into what could potentially be a very, very dangerous person just to step close to? As we can see with Nick Diaz, though, when he does have his opponent on the back foot, I mean, I think this is like a 15, 16, 17 punch combination against Paul Daly. He just keeps going. He just wears on his opponent, and there's not a lot of power in these punches. He does land with power occasionally, but he wings them from so far. He's got such a thud when he lands them. And working the body as well, I do like this. And Anderson Silva does like to put his back against the fence. He does like to beckon his opponent on. So if he does that, Nick Diaz is going to oblige. He's going to walk forward and start clubbing him. And the thing that's interesting about Nick Diaz's style is his punches are very long. They're almost like reaping punches. So they'll collect anything on their way. And with Anderson Silva relying a lot on his reaction time, it's very difficult to time Nick Diaz, because he's not the quickest puncher. He has quite a traditional boxing style. So as he moves forward and he throws these, several punch combinations, Anderson Silva cannot slip all of these. He's going to have to move, be on his toes and get out the way. And can he do that for the full 25 minutes when Nick Diaz is just pushing forward and walking him down? It's a tough question to ask, but for me, Nick Diaz is really going to push Anderson Silva's conditioning, and given the fact that he's taken a lot of time off, there are questions about whether he's going to come back as the same fighter or not. Now, taking into account his age as well, he is later on in his years. We've never seen him particularly push paces in fights because usually people are intimidated by him. One person that's not going to be intimidated by him is Nick Diaz. Nick Diaz won't care about pushing forward on Anderson Silva. He doesn't care about getting hit. He'll take a punch to land a punch. And that's the kind of fighter that you need to be against Anderson Silva, the same kind of fighter that Chris Weidman was. Yeah, and just a thing that we learnt about the camp is Joe Schilling, I think a guy that you've known before, and Artem Levin. These are world-class kickboxers that have been invited down to that camp to help out. And they're the kind of guys that you need going into fight someone like Anderson Silva. Yeah, well, he's clearly taking it very seriously. I've worked with Joe Schilling a couple of times. He's a monster Thai boxer, very, very traditional, classically trained, very tall and rangy. A perfect sparring partner to prepare you for Anderson Silva. Yeah, and you were just talking about Diaz not being intimidated. He's a guy that really, he loves it before the fight. He'll talk about it before the fight, he'll talk about it after the fight, but he'll talk to you during the fight as well. Yeah, and that's why we love him. Yeah, of course. He's got that street fighter mentality. He wants to fight you. And you know when you're watching a Nick Diaz fight, he's going to bring it. Look, I mean, I love all this. And we see Conor McGregor having a lot of success with it as well. We have, yeah. And Nick Diaz does it so well. And it's genuine. That's why I like it. He really wants to get inside your head and draw a fight out of you. And Anderson Silva does the same thing. He goads his opponents. That was the last round in the BJ Penn fight. They both started on the Bud Light logo. You know, no space at all. Headbutting the jab, slapping it out the way. I mean, look at BJ Penn's face. People don't put this kind of pressure on BJ. No. Diaz is just relentless. This boxing style that he's got, he just wears people down with it. It's a constant picking and wearing. Even when the round's over, he's still talking. He's still keeping the fight going. So there's not a point where his opponent relaxes.
Yeah.
And all this, you know, the talking, the hands down. What's Anderson Silva going to do with it? How's Anderson Silva going to feel when somebody's doing it to him? Someone that's not going to buy into Anderson Silva's. Is Anderson Silva going to treat Nick Diaz the same? Is he going to be able to capitalize on this kind of playfulness, or is Nick Diaz going to capitalize on Anderson Silva? There are a lot of factors in this fight. One thing that we're not talking about is the ground game. I just don't see it going there. I mean, we could talk for hours about it. Anderson Silva has a fantastic ground game, as does Nick Diaz. I don't think Anderson Silva wants to fight on the floor. I don't see Nick Diaz trying to take it there. And I don't really think that either of them have the ability to take each other down, because their defensive wrestling is so much better.
Okay, interesting. Well, we've got some stats to show you now. And this makes interesting reading, Dan. So, most knockouts in UFC history for Anderson Silva, greatest number of significant strikes. What we're seeing here is not just in their respective weight classes. No. We're talking about in the history of UFC fights. Both of these guys are powerful and bring lots of volume. Yeah. This just has the makings of greatness.
Well, the best of the best. I mean, that's what we're dealing with right now. That's why it's such a special fight. And if you look at these stats, they support the things that we've been saying. You know, Anderson Silva, most KOs in UFC history, highest striking accuracy. These talk about the fact that he is one of the best strikers around. And then the same thing with Nick Diaz, highest striking rate, one of the busiest. Yeah. It's, you know, it's volume versus accuracy. It's going to be a fascinating one. I literally can't wait. Yeah.
Back to Twitter then, and Michael Hisco poses this question: how does Nick Diaz neutralise the size difference between him and Anderson Silva? Now, this has been a really debated topic. GSP weighed in on it. A lot of other people have weighed in on it. So, Dan Hardy, can you please weigh in on this? Because Anderson Silva's fought as high as light heavyweight. Yeah. Nick Diaz fought for a lightweight title, and I think, if my memory serves me correctly, the highest or heaviest that he's fought is about 180 pounds, a catchweight bout, a little while ago now.
Yeah, I can't think of a time when he's fought higher. It is an interesting question, and obviously, you know, Anderson Silva is the bigger fighter. We can't forget, though, that Anderson Silva has also fought at 175 at Rumble on the Rock against Yushin Okami. So he has almost fought, you know, at welterweight. That's 10 pounds lighter than middleweight. Yeah. So he does have the capacity to drop that weight, which means he's not the biggest of middleweights around. So I don't think it's going to be that much of a factor, and I think that where Nick Diaz lacks in size, he makes up for in tenacity and conditioning. So, you know, it is a factor, and it may be a benefit to Anderson Silva, but I don't see it being a massive deal, really.
Interesting. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Dan. So, can Anderson Silva make a successful comeback to earn a middleweight title shot, or will Nick Diaz upset the odds in Las Vegas? Silva aims to prove he's still a champion despite his devastating injury just 13 months ago. But Diaz will enjoy being the pantomime villain and bring some Stockton heat. You can head over to unibet.com for a comprehensive package of pre-fight and live odds ahead of this terrific main event. Who's your pick to win? How do you see the fight finishing? As always, there are odds to be found on every round, and it's all brought to you by Unibet. Watch and bet live with Unibet, the official betting partner of the UFC. So Dan, we could pore over that main event all day, but New Guard and Old Guard will be displaying under those bright lights of Vegas, and there are some superb pairings on that main card.
There are, all the way through, right into the prelims. There's some good fights. Let's talk about Tyron Woodley for a start. He's taking on Kelvin Gastelum. I'm a big fan of Woodley. I think he's got a lot of potential in this division. He's got the size and the power and the ability to certainly compete with the top in the weight class. We just need to see him settle into the UFC a bit more, I think. But this fight against Kelvin Gastelum, this is an opportunity for one of these guys to really emerge, ready to take a step forward and say to the top 5, I'm coming for a title shot. Kelvin Gastelum, I still think he's quite young in his career, quite young in his fighting style, but he's developing so quickly. Yeah. And with wins over people like Jake Ellenberger, he's making a lot of noise. Obviously, we've got Joe Rosen on the card, who's a favourite, a UFC veteran. You know, We see this guy, he's a firecracker on every card he's on. I think most bonuses in the UFC or something.
Loves a bonus.
Yeah, he's a fantastic fighter, and everybody's excited to see him on the card. And he'll be fighting Ally Aquinta, who's coming off a great win over Ross Pearson. That's a big name to have on his record.
Sure is.
Really made a lot of people take notice when he won that fight. Fighting Joe Lozon, if he gets to win over Joe Lozon, then he can start pushing towards the names that everyone's going to start recognising. Then we've got Thales Leites on the card. Another fighter that's really improved a lot in these last few fights. We've seen him in the past, he's got a fantastic ground game and we know this. But the problem that he's had in the past is his striking has let him down. This is something he's gone away and worked on, and we've seen huge developments in his last couple of fights. But he's going to need him against Tim Boesch. A big, powerful athlete, likes to stand in the pocket and trade, can generate massive power with short punches, good wrestling, good takedown defense, but really he's going to use that to keep Thales Leites on the feet. I think this is going to be a stand-up war that's really going to test Thales Leites' stand-up ability. Jordan Main taking on Thiago Alves. A fantastic win over Mike Pyle, who's a good friend of mine, a very well-respected fighter in the MMA community for his help in the gym. He's a very talented fighter, so for Main to have beaten him, that's a huge name. A second name that he could add to his record is Thiago Alves, a mainstay in the welterweight division for years and years. One of my favourite fighters, a very classically trained Muay Thai fighter. Really going to put Jordan Main to the test. Really see if he's got the minerals for the top of the division.
All killer and no filler, that main card. Fantastic stuff. So after 183, we go to February the 14th, where Stephen Wonderboy Thompson headlines against Brandon Thatch in Broomfield, Colorado. And then the Octagon moves to Porto Alegre, Brazil, for Bigfoot Silva versus Frank Mir. February concludes with UFC 184 in Los Angeles, where Chris Weidman defends his middleweight belt for the 4th time against Vita Belfort, and Rowdy Ronda Rousey goes head-to-head with Kat Zingano. And you can get all the pre-fight odds with Unibet, the official betting partner of the UFC. Dan and I will be back to preview those 2 huge title fights at UFC 184. And don't forget that you can tweet us at Unibet using the hashtag InsideTheOctagon with any questions regarding those fights for Dan and I to grapple over on the show. Enjoy Silva Diaz, thanks for your company, and we'll see you soon.
This is the moment UFC fans around the world have been waiting for.